Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, James Cooper.
And myself, Scott Morrison.
How's Scott?
Scott is good. How's James?
Very good, very good. We're getting back into the podcasting room again, really getting into some more detail around one of our favourite subjects, which is stakeholder management.
Yeah. I think when it comes to stakeholder management, it always comes down to the T2 element of who we're dealing with. We're dealing with humans, right? And that's who we are, the people performance people. So we always talk about how can we clarify our communication? How can we set the standards, the examples, the needs for everybody? So when we talk about stakeholder managers, the idea here is the process of identifying, prioritizing and engaging with the right stakeholders to ensure that we have successful decision making and that the projects and the journeys we're on are as successful as they can be.
Okay, so just for clarity then, identify, prioritize, and then start to understand and communicate with these people, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, like you've just said there, number one, let's identify these stakeholders. Who are they and why? Number two, how do we then prioritize these stakeholders? What do they do for us? What do they bring to the table? Why do we need them? What's their level of input, if that makes sense? And number three, understanding and communicating more effectively with these people.
Okay. So let's get into number one first then. So we're looking at identify. So who are they? And if we really get into the detail of who these stakeholders could be, well, who could they be, Scott?
I think the general thing here is when we talk about stakeholders, when we talk to our clients, customers, everything like that, a lot of people instantly go to my stakeholder is my boss, my gaffer, my lead, who I report into. Everybody looks up for some reason as to who it can be. And I think it's different for everybody. And the idea here is identifying, like we say, who they are. But let's think about this realistically. For me, the stakeholder is anybody who impacts my day, impacts my journey. So who is it that has an influence and who is it that has an interest in what I'm about, what I'm doing, what I'm trying to deliver?
And I think for everybody that's listening there, it could be on a number of different things. It could be that maybe one person that you work with on a regular basis and they are very much interested in what you do on a daily basis. Or it could be one of the new stakeholders might be somebody new joining the team. It might be somebody that's worked in a different sector and then they've joined your team and they're now working in your organisation or in your service. But if it is that we start to look at a little bit more detail around, okay, is there specific projects that we might be looking at?
Yeah.
And is it when I'm in the planning phase of before I step into a project, is that something we might need to consider? Who are the stakeholders that we might be needing to consider for this particular project? Or is it then when you start to think about, and for leaders within all of the sectors, all of the businesses, all the organisations, is there a pattern of behaviour that you're trying to adapt, you're trying to tweak a little bit, and actually you want to engage in a new bit of tech, if you like, or a new sort of way of working? And that's going to have an impact. And is there any stakeholders around that? Is there any stakeholders that we need to engage with and then start to look at in a little bit more detail? So when we say it could be anybody, but who can these stakeholders be, or what can stakeholders be?
Right. Okay. Well, if we try and break this down then a little bit, because I think people need to understand they can open the spectrum to what a stakeholder is. So if we sort of identify a couple of different areas, and then we could even go wider than that. But if we take a look at stakeholders being internal or external, if you imagine that internal piece, who's around me, who's in the team, who knows what's going on and why we're trying to achieve these things. But then you could also look at the external piece. Well, think about that. We as T2 work with clients across 3 different industry sectors: private, public, sports elite, being a big thing for us at the moment, and a big focus. Who are the clients? What do they need? Why do they need it? Why are we important to them? What influence do we have on them? What interest do they hold in us? All of these different things can balance out. So it's not just a small thing. It's going to be a plethora of different people for different reasons.
And I think when we come back to the touch points on who it is, but what else could they be? Well, they could be senior.
Absolutely.
They could be senior and they could be junior. And there's positives and some potential barriers that we might have from both elements. So if it is that someone who you're speaking to as a stakeholder and they are senior to you, does that then impact the way that you communicate and you engage with them? Well, let's get into that detail. And then the flip side of the same coin is that it's junior, somebody that's in a junior position or maybe even from an experience point of view. But where did these sit alongside you? Is there anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can look at the idea of whether it's an individual, so somebody who's niche to a one-man band, if that makes sense, but in an organization, or is it a group? You know, is it a big project team that you're working with? So am I dealing with a solo entity? And if so, how do I communicate and keep everything fluid through that? Or is the network for the project going to be wider because I'm dealing with 10, 15, 20 different people? And as a result, I've got to spread that same information from the individual to a wider piece. But then as a result of the wider piece, who and what am I communicating, and what amount and what volume, etc., etc. So individual or groups as a part of it too.
Yeah, and I think when you start to look at once you've highlighted either an individual or group, we can then start to think about, right, okay, I've had these before where maybe one of my stakeholders was really data rich.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also had stakeholders where they've been quite data poor.
Okay.
Now, for anybody that's just thinking, well, what does that mean in regards to stakeholders then? Well, actually, have I got somebody, am I speaking, am I communicating, am I prioritising some of these people that they've worked in the organisation or in that team for a prolonged period of time, i.e. 22 years plus, or are they potentially data poor from an experience point of view where they've worked in the environment, they might be fresh out of uni, they've got all the detail in their heads, but they haven't necessarily applied it yet? Yeah, and there's a different point of view to both. There's positives and again, different areas for development for everybody. But if it is that I'm data rich, I've got some experience.
Yeah.
I might have tried to change some of the things in this organisation before, whereas somebody that's just through the door, brilliant, they've got all these real excited, they're providing lots of detail and different creative ideas, and then put them two together, there's a difference in communication, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. And then the next one then would be saboteurs or champions. So who's with you or against you? Who's friend or foe? And sometimes it's understanding the reason for this. If I focus on saboteur for a minute, so, you know, the saboteur can come across as the obstruction, the slow-moving person, the person that needs more than you can give, the person who's not receiving communications and seems to be hindering your process. There's a strong chance that these people don't actually know they're a saboteur. They just work differently to you. And as a result, they're motivated to work a certain way, which can be in direct competition with how you're used to working. Does that make sense? So that they're creating a hazard without knowing.
Yeah, I think there's also that from a saboteur point of view where you've got someone that unpicks your idea and they're not necessarily in your corner, but they are the person that provides that feedback at the time. And it could be the internal narrative. When you do this every single time, Scott, you keep on having this conversation. You're the only one out of these 23 people in this room that picks the bones out of my idea.
Yeah.
Pack it in. Stop it. I don't want to do it. Stop doing it that way. Or is it that actually they're doing it for your own benefit?
Yeah. And it could be just the way they work. They might need to understand the A through to the Z of every part of that process before they can get on board that journey, before they can fully commit to what their slice of that pie is for delivery. It's just how it works. So when we talk about saboteurs, there are people that will work insulated and isolated and, you know, really want to be the big fish in that small pond maybe, and it is going against you, but there's a good chance that some of these people don't necessarily realise they're actually being an obstacle.
And then flip that coin again and go, well, okay, what are the champions then?
Yeah.
Who are the people that are behind the dream and actually going, yeah, go on, Scott, go do it, go express yourself. And then is there obviously a little bit of sort of blind optimism here, like where someone is going, yeah, we can do it, nothing's going to stop us now, when really you need someone to just rein you back in a little bit and go, yeah. And again, positives and negatives of both.
Right.
But you have got those people that are behind the dream, and then sometimes the people that are not quite behind the dream yet.
Yes, absolutely. And then, you know, there's 4 or 5 stages that are broken down, but then there's the rest of the world. You know, there's a wider scope of people. And if you just look at what industry sector you may be in to how this might sit. So obviously, if you're a leader, you've got your employees. If you're a leader, you might have partners. If you're a leader, you might have investors. You've got that situation where if you're, you know, a ground worker, and I don't mean literally ground worker, but if you're working from the level up, we could be looking at what influences around you. and what that team looks like as a project unit. Who's in it with you together? How are we going to move through that journey? The users of your product, so therefore outside again. There are so many different aspects of what a stakeholder could be. We just need to be a little bit broader on our view.
Yeah, and I think when we start to look at some of the detail of what these stakeholders have in common, we can start to go into an even more detail. And for everybody that's still going through this, we are still at that very much identifying who these people are as stakeholders and then what they're bringing to the table. Yeah. So what do some of these stakeholders bring to the table then, Scott?
You've got to look across, again, a spectrum of what we're trying to achieve. So who do we need and what do they bring to the table is really the best. What value do they add? What do they bring to the table? So when you look at it as an example, we've got people who are influencers. How do they influence that journey? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so this is where they could have this particular stakeholder or stakeholders may have the power of strategic importance in the business.
Absolutely. So they know who, how, where, and when, and as a result of that influence, can say the right thing to the right people at the right time for you to move forward.
And this is where then you would, if you people that are having an influence on what you do, well, hold on a minute, they might have the power then.
Absolutely. So in any scenario, there's got to be somebody who's going to say red light, green light, yes, no, go, stop. So you're going to have somebody who needs that power of approval or that power to say no, if you like. And then again, moving into that, if these people are at that high level, they're likely to have a greater network. So their connections are going to be wider for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think when I know that even speaking about big networks of people, when you not necessarily assume, but when you're in situations and you go, do you know no, do you know? Oh, I know. And it's interesting when you start to think about, well, if I open up my network to you, Scott, and the same principle, other stakeholders that we have, if you could get into that network, then that could open lots and lots of doors and maybe even get what you need from your stakeholder because of not necessarily them, but the network that they have.
Absolutely. Listen, when we talk about any role and anybody listening to this that's looking to take that next step or work towards a promotion, etc., you probably know if you've already won a promotion or won the next level up in your journey to where you're trying to go to, you've probably delivered and worked and communicated at that level for a whole year before you got given the kudos or the title for that role. But as a result, you had to be networking a level up to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
It's getting in the right room, isn't it?
Yes.
And then if it was around the word irreplaceability, Scott.
Okay.
So you've got a stakeholder that has the influence, the power of approval. He has a big network, but then there's this irreplaceability element.
Right. So this falls in, I call this the guru, if you like, the subject matter expert. This is the person for that one part of the project you can't do without. They have that unique skill, And when you talk about organizations, they have a product, they have a unique selling point. This person has their own unique selling point. They have that matter of fact expertise with experience for longevity or because of what that product is or what that motion is that they have it. So it's not necessarily irreplaceable in relation to you can't ever get rid of this person or move this person on or this person leave. It might be in that moment for that subject matter with that tone.
Yeah, and I get that. And again, there's other people that have suggested that if you think you are irreplaceable, then that's probably the time you need to be replaced. But in the moment, it's about where are we getting this idea from? Who am I touching from a stakeholder point of view to go, I need you in this moment because you're the subject specialist.
Yeah.
You are that guru, like you mean.
And and that person will change in title, in expertise, in who they are as you go through projects. To get a project off the ground, it might be that person is the right person because of influence and contact. Second stage, that person's now used their attributes and skills and influence. Now it's a level of interest and I've got to use the technical side of things. Who's going to put me in the right network at the right space to do what I need to do now for the power of approval? So that person of irreplaceability or subject matter expertise might vary at any point and can do so. So don't get locked into just one. Be aware of who the stakeholders are to utilize their value and their availability to you in that process.
So would that suggest then that you've got different stakeholders stepping up in different areas and different timeframes.
100%. 100%. In any project that you put out there as an organisation, you're going to have the big dreamer to start us off.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to have the planners to put some structure behind that. Then you're going to get the doers underway to get in there. Then you're going to have your coaches in there to make sure people are skilled and ready to rock and roll. Then you're going to have HR in there to make sure everybody's comfortable with the journey. They're on board with the journey. They're committed to the journey. And then you might go back to the blue sky thinker, who will then realign everybody at a certain point on that journey to bring the crowd back in to realign with what we're trying to do. There are 5,000 different job titles out there for a reason, and all of them hold the value. It's just at different stages of that journey.
Yeah, and I think so this brings me right onto the next stage, which is that prioritization.
Okay.
So who is it that or why is it that, and why does it matter that I need to actually speak to these people? Why is it that I'm getting you involved at this moment, this stage right now?
Okay.
So when we start to look at prioritizing our stakeholders, so we've identified it could be anybody. We've gone through the little bits of stages of who they could be and what they bring to the table. But now let's start to think about why.
Okay.
So is it that we can start to really look at what we call the stakeholder map?
Yeah.
Now, give me just a little bit of an insight into some of the headings that we might need to put people under then.
So when we started this conversation and we said, right, what is it that gives you a stakeholder? Why are they a stakeholder? And we relate it to two things. There's influence, there's interest. Okay. So they don't have to have both in abundance, but it helps when they have one. Some people will have both, and some people will peak at both. They will be uber interested because they might have a stake in where that might lead.
Yeah.
They have a lot of influence because of the rank that they may be in within that organisation, an example, and what the output of that project might deliver to both of them. So you may have someone who is high on interest and high in influence. And if that's the case, for you as that project leader, we've got to think about how do we better manage this person to maximise their input or output at key moments. So for me, go on, who's going to ask?
So is that then manage most thoroughly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because when we think about managing most thoroughly, it's what do I need to give this person? They're completely influential and they're completely interested. So even if you set up the scenario for them to be everything to everything you're doing, it's up to them to make a choice. But if there's a meeting, an engagement session, a round robin email, a SWOT analysis that's going around, any information, all information is power of knowledge, right? So we would share all. So if there's a meeting to be had, they get an invite. If there's an engagement session, they get an invite. If it's a round the robin email to keep everybody up to date, they're CC'd in. You give them the knowledge of power for that scenario. So you would manage them most fully by giving them everything you could give them that would keep that stake high for them.
And I think from a question point of view, all stakeholders can't sit in this box. Under this heading. All stakeholders can't sit under this heading, and so where else might these sit?
So if you imagine then that they peak at interest but have no influence.
Yeah.
So the peak at interest. So this is somebody who you would keep completely informed. They're interested. They want to know. They're curious about it. So you would still give them information, but it might be the notes of the meeting, not the meeting invite. As an example, it can go a lot wider than that, but just to control it. Do they have an influence? No. Can they influence the room? No. So would they be in the meeting to give their ideas? No. But they might be interested enough to see what the outputs of that meeting are. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So you're keeping them informed, but you're just not bringing them all the way in. Because when you think about what a meeting is for you, having the right people in the right time and space at the right time to get the best output.
Be the most productive.
Exactly. So if this person has no influence and no say whether it goes forward or not, then why would they be in the room? But what you can do is give them the outputs of that meeting to keep their interest levels high. Who's to say that in 6 months' time, this person doesn't just sit in the interested zone? They may now be, as a result of where the project's gone to, increase their influence.
Okay, so then that would then go under the manage most thoroughly tenor, right? When their influence increases. So let's just rewind a little bit and start to think about, well, okay, you mentioned about people that have a high interest, but not necessarily influence. What about if I don't necessarily have the highest of interest, but I do have an influence on what happens in your space, in your environment?
Right, no problem. Well, I can think of a couple of leaders that come into mind. You know, they know exactly who they are, what they want, but the way that you manage them, the way that they speak to you, is that level that they have an influence on who you are. So for me, this falls into anticipate and meet needs.
Okay. So why would that be important?
Because you've got to sit there and think, what does this person want as an influence? Do they need to know everything? Possibly not. But do they need to know the right things at the right time? Is there a potential for something to snowball? And if you see that there's a potential to snowball, well, then let's meet it at the earliest point to give them a heads up, because what they may have as influence is a way to change that journey. It might put a stop to that journey, or it might help you gain momentum. But the point being is, keeping them involved at the right time for the right amount will help you with that.
Yeah, and I think even when we're thinking of people or stakeholders that have the higher influences, it's about understanding that these people could find the room. And what I mean by that is that they could end up in a scenario or situation or meeting where if they had everything that you could anticipate and then meet their needs, they'd be able to get your project, your people, get what you need from the situations. But if they don't have it, then really you're sort of holding people back a little bit.
And you've got another way to look at it is simply, you've got people who want everything from A to Z. They want the numbers, they want the detail, they want the times, they want the dates, they want the location, they want the logistics, they want everything you can think of. But there are some people who can get everything you can think of from that minimalistic information, that header, that quick bulletin email, that one snapshot of information as to where we're at this date in time, what this might lead to. They can build a picture around that. So not everybody needs everything to get a full picture. Sometimes they just need headers, bullet points, a framework of what's going on to give them that futuristic view of where it might lead to. And that can be enough for some people.
To obviously get the decision that you need and the outcome that you're planning for.
So let me give you an example there. We work with a number of different people. When we talk about this sort of level of stakeholder map, who sits where, 9 times out of 10, if I asked a cohort who I would manage most thoroughly, the first person they would say is Tracy, lead consultant Tracy, or Martin, manage most thoroughly. Well,
to your boss then, right?
Yes, so my boss, who I lead into, right? But you and I both know that's not necessarily the case.
And who is the person you manage most thoroughly, Scott?
Well, I manage most thoroughly my wife, because she's the boss. Because the general gist here, when we talk about how work sits, just for me in this moment, to add a little bit of normality to the conversation, work-life balance is key. Right? And within that work-life balance, if my tribe at home is happy and my tribe at work is happy, my unconscious motivators and how I work are being met. So I'm in a good place. So if I get my work-life balance met properly, I am more successful at work. I feel supported at work and I feel able to free myself and time to be the best version of me at work.
Because you've managed your stakeholder.
Because I've managed my wife as a stakeholder. My wife absolutely knows where I'm at what date of the month, and where I'm going to be in what city at what time. And as a result of that information, from managing her most thoroughly with the information she needs, she can then draw on her resources, her network, her connections in our private life to enable that the family has the balance and the need to get people in different places at the right time whilst I'm not available to do so. That gives me comfort. That gives me security whilst I'm out on the road. It gives me the ability to be the best version of me when I'm doing my work. So I'm able to be more successful at work as a result of this work-life balance. But in this scenario, managing my wife most thoroughly in relation to the information that she needs for us to be successful as a partnership at home enables me to fly a bit more solo with the freedom to be more successful at work. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And obviously knowing that that's the clarity for you to be best at work, you manage your stakeholders personally. We know professionally normally connect with each other.
It really does, but this is the difference. And different people have different views on it. But if we were to switch that then and go anticipate and meet needs, that's where Tracy lands for me. If I see something coming around the corner that I'm not sure of or have minimal information of, or I'm struggling for time with something, I need to anticipate what that might look like for me and for Tracy as a result. And that's where we connect.
Yeah.
And then within that snapshot, Tracy's able to jump in or step out or put somebody else in that spot and step out. But the point being is, I'm not leaving it too last minute. Does that make sense? Because if I leave it too last minute, no one can help.
And I think when I'm going from top to bottom, if you like.
Sure.
So we've got the two extremes of, you know what, you've got the interest, but you don't necessarily influence.
Yeah.
You've got the influence, but not necessarily the interest. at the moment, and we've also looked at managing most thoroughly where you have an interest and you have an influence. But if we just rein it back down then and start to think, well, okay, we've got stakeholders, we could potentially fit everybody under one of these headers.
Yeah.
But what about the people that don't necessarily, they still have an interest, but it's not a massive interest.
Right.
And they have an influence, but they don't necessarily have a massive influence. Yeah. What would we call that heading if we could?
So that's like touching base, isn't it? It's that polite information sharing. So this is regular and minimal contact. So you may speak once a week, twice a month, 3 times a month. The regularity is what's needed. It's not regular in every other hour or every day. The regularity is what you would agree as suitable between you. And minimal contact, it's that contact of understanding what information's key for this person at that time. And it's, whereas it was for most, managing most thoroughly, it was everything. In this scenario, it might be, just so you're aware, for me as a consultant, I'm on the road with this client for the next so many days, and this is what I'm delivering, and this is what they're looking to get from it. And that can be enough. And I might not touch base with that person for another 4 days.
And then I think, for the people that are listening then, if it's not, what are the normal, through the workshops we deliver, Scott, who would normally sit within that regular minimal contact? Who are the people that you might have seen in some of the workshops and gone, you know what, that's probably this person, this role to me. Regular minimal contact. Who's normally for everybody, by the way?
Well, again, that's going to depend on what the project is or what they're trying to achieve. Because let me be clear, in relation to how you move through those titles, every week, every month, every quarter, every half year, that might change.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to adapt and understand your environment to what's needed by who and by when. And as a result of that person who's regular and minimal contact, which is why you give them the information as at to whatever level it is, the smaller levels, in 3 months' time might have walked right up that ladder and could be absolutely going to meet needs. Because now you're in their realm of interest because the project's growing. It's taking on more people. It's costing more money. You're dealing with a different client, or the client interest is now larger. So that person could have been Martin, regular and minimal contact. But now the impact to our business and theirs is growing, and the influence of what we do is now growing within that in that organization. That regular and minimal contact might actually now be managed most thoroughly because the interest levels and the influence levels of Martin has grown substantially in the journey of that project and the connection between the both.
So that could be CEO, it could be manager, it could be line manager, it could be your boss, someone who you direct report into, or it could be actually someone in your team. One of your peers has then got promoted. There used to be regular minimal contact, and now, guess what? They're now in the positions where they're now leading a different part of the organisation, and you have to engage with them.
Well, let me give you a really good example of what you just said there, because that makes more sense with the way you said that. Regular and minimal contact. We're in regular and minimal contact, right? I'm with you today, but I might not see you the whole of next week. But you've got a rough idea what I'm up to. And if I've got an idea of something I'm a bit worried about, or there's content I need to learn, or there's questions I need to ask, etc., I might drop in on you, or Bernice, or Spencer, or Tracy, whoever. But then there was a scenario not too long ago where I needed to take 2 days off, which wasn't planned. It was, and as a result of myself and Bernice just having regular and minimal contact about some of the stuff we was up to and what we was doing, she was in the position to then step in for me that very next day. So it was seamless in a transition.
So it could be situational then.
Absolutely, it's situational. Absolutely. So, the knowledge is power, and the more you share, you can give, right? And I get that, but knowledge can be too much for some people. So you give them the right amount in accordance to what they need.
Okay. Which I think makes it this a lovely little one-liner for you there, Scott. So as we're now talking through this then, and we've started to put our stakeholders, whether they are good, bad, saboteurs or champions, or internal, external, whatever it could be, whether they're data rich or data poor, we've now put them in a priority map, if you like, of who are the people and how we're going to engage with these people. So let's go to stage 3 and start to look at, okay, so if we apply these headers and we start to get into the detail of who's where and what they're bringing to the table, what are the things that we might need to consider from an engagement point of view then?
I guess when we talk about who we are and what we do for engagement and having that communication, what are the 3 key things we work towards? What are our 3Ps?
So it's people,
Yeah.
it's projects,
Yeah.
so projects of work or bodies of work, or patterns of behaviour.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about these stakeholders and we're talking about engagement, what do we need? What are we looking for? How do we help? How do we move these things? I can have the best morning, but then I can interact with a person and that can change the whole dynamic, right? But then when we're speaking to people, when we're speaking to our clients and we're trying to engage with them, how things are working, how things aren't working, 9 times out of 10, the wins or the losses can fall within these 3Ps. It's the people they're working with, it's the patterns they're working to, or it's the projects they're engaged in. And it's understanding to which level of engagement these 3Ps can land for people.
Yeah. I think even just as a final point before we summarise, it's if you are considering the person and the priority, where you've prioritised them, there is a reason why you are engaging with this person. There is a reason, there needs to be a real sort of drive and motivation to actually go and engage with you in the right way.
Sure.
In, not necessarily my way, but in your way.
Absolutely.
Now, if it is that we started to think of, right, what happens now if we don't prioritise or identify, prioritise, and engage and understand our stakeholders to this sort of level and maybe even a little bit deeper?
Yeah.
What's the potential impact that could have?
It's the loss of clarity, in the goal and staying on track and moving to that end, or, working with the end, with the end in mind. If we don't have the right communication with the right people, you're drawing too many people into a situation for starters, which can cloud the scenario, add fog to the situation. Clarity then disperses and there's too many cooks, if that makes sense.
I'm going to ask the audience a question here. I'm going to ask them to put some comments in the box, and understanding that if there is anybody listening to this now and thinking that they could be a potential stakeholder for somebody else, and you've been sat in a meeting and you've looked to the left, looked to the right, and gone, "Why am I here?"
Yeah, this could have been an email.
Literally, this could have been an email, and now I'm having my time wasted. And I've also wasted your time because I'm not bringing anything to the party.
Yeah.
I'm not having that in-depth conversation. And then, is there anything in regards to the productivity of an organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just put this down. If we talk about who do we put in the box of manage most thoroughly, think about that as the listener. Think about what you've got going on around you in that, that identification of who's who in the zoo and why are they there, right? Who's doing that? Who's there and why are they there? Put their names in manage most thoroughly and why they're there. If it's a case of anticipate and meet needs, this is the influential people. Why are they there? Put their names in that box or under that header. Why are they there? Why are they influential? What do they bring to the party? What do they add to this journey? What do you need them for? And if it's a case of they're not influential, but they have high interest, what information do I share and who's in that box? And why am I sharing it? What's the potential of why I share it? Because we need to, listen, if we're going to be productive, we need to manage our time effectively, not just ours, but of those around us. You can easily turn somebody on as a switch to getting them involved by giving them the right amount of information in the right amount of time. And it's just as easily, if not easier, to turn them off if you give them an overload or an under amount by not putting the right person in the right header.
And I've got one example of that where I've gone to really quite a influential CEO with some of the thoughts and feelings I had at the time.
Okay.
What he needed was the number.
So he wanted facts. Facts and figures, not thoughts and feelings.
Facts. He didn't want me telling him how everybody was feeling and how it was impacting everybody's sort of morale and how they were feeling as they were finishing the work and they were feeling a bit downtrodden. Didn't necessarily matter to him. So when we talk about learning from mistakes, I definitely learned from a mistake there when I've gone to somebody that is very much highly influential and interested in what I was doing at the time, but I didn't even understand and communicate with them the way that they needed it.
Right.
My stakeholder management was poor.
And it wasn't, let's be clear, it wasn't that the information you had wasn't of importance. It was important, but it was in a different box.
Correct.
And this information was about understanding who you was dealing with to give the right. So what box was you addressing with what information?
Yeah.
Okay.
So understanding, everyone, identify, when we're talking about stakeholders, identify, prioritize, and then understand and communicate to them in the way that's going to get the best out of these environments. Scott, is there anything else that you would like to add just before we get into this and we just end the podcast today?
I just think, like we say, we started the session with understanding it's effective communication that will maximize your network and your connects with these stakeholders. Who are they and why are they the stakeholders? And as a result of that, what are your measurements? What does good look like as a stakeholder? You can control that via the knowledge you share or the time you share.
Scott, it's been a pleasure as always getting into the podcasting room with you, and obviously follow us on the socials and find the links if you need anything from either myself or Scott or anybody else at T2. Then reach out. So Scott, we've covered a lot of detail in there around stakeholder management. Great to see that we might get a little bit of engagement from the comments and people that have been in meetings and been in situations where they've actually thought, am I actually a stakeholder here, or do I need to have an interest and influence in this meeting?
Am I managing it right? Am I seeing it through the right lens? Absolutely. Guys, put it in the comments. If you've got questions, drop them in the comments. And what we can do is we can identify and direct to the right places in the hub, or we can come back to you directly with the way forward or a different opinion. Everybody's going to see this through a slightly different lens, and it's just being aware of that.
Thank you for tuning in to the People Performance Podcast with me, James Cooper.
And myself, Scott Morrison.
Have a great week, guys, and we'll speak to you soon again.
Bye.